The wind was a sculptor, carving the loneliness of the high plains into the man's face. Caleb stood before the two mounds, their small wooden crosses leaning as if in deference to the gale. Snow, fine as dust, settled in the crude letters etched into the wood. Mary. Anna. The names were a prayer he no longer knew how to speak. He had built this homestead with 4 hands, then maintained it with 2. Now the silence was so complete it had its own sound. A low hum that vibrated in his bones, the echo of a life that was no longer his. He pulled his collar higher, the rough wool scraping his jaw. The cold was a familiar penance. It kept the memories sharp, the grief honed to a killing edge. He had nothing left to lose, and so he had chained himself to this place, a warden guarding a prison of memory. Turning back toward the cabin, a dark smudge against the bruised twilight, he saw it, a flicker of wrongness. The henhouse door, ajar. It was a small thing, a detail out of place in a life meticulously ordered by routine and sorrow. He didn't hurry. His movements were always deliberate, measured. He took the rifle from its pegs inside the cabin door, its weight a comfort in his palm. The wind tore at the sound of his boots crunching on the thin crust of snow. He didn't expect a fox or a coyote. An animal would have left a trail of feathered carnage. This was something else. He pushed the door open. The scent of pine shavings and bird droppings filled the small space. In the gloom, a figure was hunched over, a wraith of desperation. A woman. Her coat was threadbare, her hair a tangled mat of straw and ice. She was stuffing eggs into a burlap sack with frantic, trembling hands, her knuckles raw and split. Huddled against her leg, half hidden in the folds of her skirt, was a small boy, no older than 5. He was a miniature of her own fear, his eyes wide and dark in a pale, pinched face. He didn't make a sound. The woman froze when she saw him, a gasp catching in her throat like a shard of glass. The egg in her hand slipped, shattering on the dirt floor, the yolk a sudden violent splash of sun in the gray light. She held her hands up, palms out, a gesture of surrender. Caleb's gaze swept over her, then settled on the child, who flinched and buried his face deeper into his mother's leg. The boy's silence was absolute, a void that pulled at Caleb. He saw the tremor in the woman's frame, not just from cold but from a fear that ran bone deep. He lowered the rifle. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of cornered things, in the eyes of men who knew their time was up. He looked at the meager haul in the sack. 6 eggs. A life risked for 6 eggs. He stepped forward, his shadow swallowing her. She flinched, a sharp, broken movement, but held her ground, a shield for her son. He reached out not for her but for the sack. His calloused fingers brushed hers as he took it. Her skin was as cold as stone. He said nothing, simply turned and walked out. She hesitated for a moment, a statue of disbelief, before scrambling after him, pulling the boy along. She stopped at the threshold of his cabin, poised for flight. The warmth from within coiled around her like a living thing, a temptation. "Come inside," Caleb said. It was not a question. His voice was rough, rusted from disuse. He set the rifle back on its pegs and moved to the stone hearth, stirring the embers. Flames licked up the logs, casting dancing shadows on the sparse walls. He gestured with his chin toward the single wooden table. "Sit." The woman, Alara, moved as if in a dream, guiding her son, Finn, onto the bench. They sat ramrod straight, 2 refugees washed up on a desolate shore. Caleb worked without speaking. He cracked the stolen eggs into a sizzling pan, the sound loud in the tense quiet. He added thick slices of bacon, cut bread from a loaf on the counter. The smell of frying meat was agonizingly rich. He placed 2 full plates on the table, then a third for himself. He poured milk into 2 tin cups. Finn stared at the food, his eyes huge, but didn't move. Alara nudged his cup forward. "Eat," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. The boy looked at Caleb, a quick, furtive glance, before snatching a piece of bacon and stuffing it into his mouth. Alara ate with a desperate, mechanical haste, as if she feared the food would be taken away. Caleb ate slowly, watching them. He saw the hollows under her eyes, the faint, faded bruise high on her cheekbone. He saw the way the boy never let go of his mother's sleeve. When they were finished, Alara gathered the plates, her movements stiff. "I can work," she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I can pay you back." Caleb nodded once, taking the plates from her. "There's a room," he said, pointing to a closed door. "It's cold." He carried a stack of fresh-cut pine to her door later, leaving it just outside. He laid 2 thick wool blankets beside it. He didn't knock. He just left them there, an offering made to a silence he understood. The days bled into one another, marked by the rising and setting of a pale winter sun. Alara worked. She scrubbed the floors he'd long neglected, mended his worn shirts with tiny, precise stitches, and kept the fire fed. She moved through his house like a ghost. Her presence felt more than seen. She never spoke unless spoken to, and he rarely spoke. Their communication was a language of gestures. A pot of coffee left on the stove for him when he came in from the cold. A neatly stacked woodpile he found waiting by the door. A bucket of clean water she hauled from the well, saving him the trip. Finn remained a silent observer. The boy trailed after Caleb at a distance as he did his chores, watching him mend a broken fence post or curry the horses. He never got too close, a small, wary satellite orbiting a grim star. One afternoon, Caleb sat on the porch, carving a piece of scrap pine. His knife moved with practiced ease, peeling away slivers of wood to reveal a shape within. He was carving a small bird, its wings half spread. He remembered carving dozens of them for Anna. When he was done, he left it on the porch rail. The next morning, it was gone. He saw Finn near the barn later, clutching the small wooden bird in his hand, his thumb rubbing smooth the carved feathers. A crack in the ice. Caleb began to hear her at night. Muffled sounds from the cold room. A sob choked back. A frantic whisper of "no, please." He knew the sound of nightmares. He would rise from his own cot and stand outside her door, not as a guard, but as a witness. He wouldn't intrude on her darkness, but he would stand at its edge until it receded. In those vigils, his own ghosts rose to meet him. The fever that had swept through the valley. Mary's labored breathing, holding Anna's small, hot hand until it grew cool. The 2 graves he'd had to dig himself in the frozen ground. He understood her haunting. It was a language they both spoke fluently. One morning, the world was gone, erased by a blizzard that descended without warning. The wind shrieked, throwing fists of snow against the cabin. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the room, the howl of the storm, and the crackle of the fire. They were trapped. The forced intimacy was a heavy blanket. They ate their meals at the table, the space between them charged with unspoken things. During a lull in the wind's assault, Caleb looked up from his plate and truly saw her. The firelight softened the harsh lines of exhaustion on her face, illuminating a strength he hadn't noticed before. Her eyes, when not clouded by fear, were the color of moss after a rain. She was looking at Finn, who was using the wooden bird to chase a crumb across the table. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. In that moment, Caleb saw it, the ghost of a family. A woman, a child, a man, a hearth, a home. It was a dangerous thought, a seed of hope planted in barren ground. He looked away, his jaw tight. Hope was a fool's game. The blizzard broke after 2 days. The world outside was pristine, buried under a thick blanket of white. The sky a brilliant, aching blue. The silence was profound. Alara, restless from the confinement, pulled on Caleb's spare coat and went outside. She found a section of fence near the barn, snapped by the weight of the snow. She began trying to fix it, her movements clumsy, her gloveless fingers quickly turning red and stiff in the biting air. Caleb came out of the barn, leading a horse. He stopped and watched her for a moment. He saw her frustration, her fierce determination to be useful, to earn her place. He walked over, the snow crunching under his boots. He didn't say a word. He just took the hammer from her fumbling grasp. His fingers grazed hers, a shock of warmth against her frozen skin. He held a new post steady while he showed her how to drive the nails in, his large hands guiding hers on the hammer. The rhythmic thud was the only sound. They worked together, a silent, efficient team, replacing the broken section. When they were done, she stood back, rubbing her raw hands together. She looked at the mended fence, a small line of order restored in the vast, wild landscape. She was trying to pay a debt, he knew, an impossible one. He looked at her, standing there in the blinding sun, her breath pluming in the air. He saw the resilience in her spine, the fight in her eyes. He saw a woman who had bent but had not broken. "You keep working like you aim to pay for those eggs," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked from her work-roughened hands to the horizon, then back to her face. His own history was a landscape of loss, and here she was, trying to build something on its edge. There was a hard, brutal clarity in the cold air. "There's that," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Or there's another way." She looked at him, confused, her brow furrowed. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. He saw the fear flicker in her eyes, the old wariness. He had to say it plainly, the only way he knew how. "You want to work until your hands bleed? Or wear my name beside me forever?" The words hung in the frozen air between them, stark and shocking. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a proposal of alliance, a forging of a dam against the world. It was an offer of a name, a home, a share in the land he had bled for. It was a fortress for two wounded soldiers and a boy who had forgotten how to speak. Alara stared at him, her lips parted in disbelief. Her mind couldn't form a reply. It was too much, too fast, a choice she didn't know how to make. Before the silence could be broken by either of them, a new sound intruded. The soft thud of a horse's hooves in the deep snow. A lone rider was approaching from the east, a dark figure steadily growing larger against the white expanse. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in Alara's stomach. She knew who it was before she could properly see his face. The man reined in his horse a few yards away. He was handsome in a cruel, polished way, with a smile that never reached his cold, assessing eyes. He swung down from the saddle with an easy, proprietary air. "Alara, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "You led me on quite a chase." He was Silas. The name itself was a wound. Caleb stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Alara and the newcomer. He didn't speak, but his body was a wall. Silas's smile widened, but it was a predator's grin. His eyes flicked to Caleb, dismissing him, then landed on Finn, who had come to the cabin door and was peeking out, clutching his wooden bird. "And there's my boy," Silas said, taking a step forward. "Come here, Finn. Your mother's been filling your head with foolishness." Alara grabbed Finn, pulling him behind her skirts. "He's not your son," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "You have no claim on him. Or me." "Don't be difficult, my love," Silas said, his tone turning sharp. "We had an arrangement. You, me, family. You seem to have forgotten the terms." His gaze swept over the homestead with contempt. "Did you really think you could find shelter in a place like this? With a man like this?" Caleb remained silent, his stillness more menacing than any threat. He was a mountain, weathered and immovable. He had faced down death in more forms than Silas could imagine. Silas finally focused on him. "This is a private matter, farmer. Between me and my property. Best you step aside." "She's not property," Caleb said. The two words were flat and final, like stones dropping into a well. Silas laughed, a short, ugly sound. "She is what I say she is, and so is the boy. He needs discipline, a firm hand, something his soft-hearted mother could never provide." He looked past Caleb, his eyes locking on Alara. "I was always good at providing discipline, wasn't I, my dear?" The memory of that discipline, of a closed fist and a cold voice, made Alara flinch. That was all Caleb needed to see. The fragile piece of his world had been shattered. This man, this blight, had brought the ugly, cruel world to his door, threatening the small, tentative thing that had begun to grow here. Silas, tired of the standoff, lunged for Alara. It was a mistake. Caleb moved with a speed that was terrifying in a man his size. He didn't reach for his rifle. This was older, more personal. His fist connected with Silas's jaw with a sickening crack of bone. The fight was not a duel. It was a storm of brutal, desperate force. Silas was slick and fast, but Caleb was raw power, fueled by a grief and a protective rage that had been dormant for years. They crashed against the newly mended fence, the wood groaning under their weight. It held. Silas pulled a knife, the blade gleaming in the sun. He slashed, catching Caleb on the forearm. Caleb barely registered the pain. He saw the graves of his wife and child on the hill. He saw Alara's terror and Finn's silent fear. He was not just fighting Silas. He was fighting the fever, the helplessness, the suffocating loneliness. He was fighting for a chance to feel something other than loss. Silas, seeing he couldn't beat Caleb, shoved him back and made a dash for the cabin. For the boy. Finn! Alara screamed. As Silas's hand reached for the child, a sound tore from Finn's throat, a sound no one had heard from him before. No! It was a child's shout, but it carried the force of a lifetime of silence. The word hit Silas like a physical blow. He froze for a single, crucial second, his head snapping around in shock. That second was all Caleb needed. He closed the distance and the fight ended as quickly as it began. It ended with the finality of a chapter closing, the heavy thud of a body in the snow, and then only the sound of the wind whispering over the plains. The aftermath was a hollow, ringing silence. The world seemed to hold its breath. The pristine snow around them was disturbed, sullied. Caleb stood over Silas, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his arm onto the white ground. The rage receded, leaving behind a vast, aching emptiness. Alara ran to him, her hands fluttering near his wound. She tore a strip from her apron and, with gentle, sure fingers, began to wrap his arm. Her touch was not the touch of a debtor or a servant. It was the touch of a partner, of an equal. Their eyes met over the makeshift bandage, and in that gaze, a universe of understanding passed between them. The answer to his question was there, unspoken but absolute. Finn walked slowly toward Caleb, his small face pale but his eyes clear. He stopped before the big, wounded man. He held out his small hand. In his palm was the carved wooden bird. He pressed it into Caleb's hand. A gift, an acceptance, a beginning. They stood there for a long time, the three of them, a strange and broken trinity under the vast, indifferent sky. The sun was beginning to sink, painting the snow in hues of rose and gold. Later, after the necessary, grim work was done, they stood together on the small hill. The two old crosses stood beside them, silent witnesses. But for the first time, the place didn't feel only like an ending. Alara stood close to Caleb, her shoulder brushing his. Finn stood between them, holding one of Caleb's large fingers in his small hand. The mended fence below stood strong. Inside the cabin, the fire burned bright, a beacon of warmth and safety in the encroaching dusk. A new story was being written on this harsh, beautiful land. A story of a found family, built not on easy love, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of shared scars and a hard-won peace.